The snow hammered against the windshield like fists, a relentless rhythm that blurred the world into a wall of white. Thaddeus Stone gripped the wheel tighter, his jaw locked, his pulse steady only because he willed it so. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this storm, not on this road, not dragging his black SUV through Devil's Pass at midnight. When every sane man had already taken shelter, he was supposed to be in Denver, penning the final line of a 9-figure merger, raising a glass of vintage champagne on his private jet, and flying home before the news cycle even had the chance to bite. That was how his life worked, efficient, controlled, unyielding. But not tonight. Tonight, the storm had eaten every plan, stripped him of signal, and reminded him that not everything could be bent with money or willpower. The headlights cut through the blizzard and fractured beams, and for a moment it was only snow, ice, and cliff. Then he saw them, 3 shapes, small, wrong, moving against the wind like shadows pulled from a nightmare. At first, he thought the storm had tricked his eyes. He blinked once, twice, rubbed the glass with the back of his glove, but they were still there. Stumbling forms half swallowed by snow, children. His heart lurched. He slammed the brakes, the SUV fishtailed, wheels shrieking across ice, the rear end swinging wide until the cliff rose into view, black and bottomless. He fought the spin, muscles straining, and somehow, by inches, the vehicle skidded to a halt. Breath rattled out of him in sharp bursts. Too close, too damn close. When the headlights steadied, so did the figures. 3 little girls stood just beyond the beam, their clothes torn, their cheeks raw with cold, their bodies trembling. The snow swirled around them like a pack of wolves. But they didn't move toward him, didn't wave for help. They only stared. Thaddeus shoved the SUV into park, flung open the door, and stepped into the storm. The wind roared in his ears, cold so sharp it stung the bones. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hey, get in the car." His voice broke against the gale. Carried away before it could reach them, they didn't move, not at first. The tallest one stepped forward, blonde hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and unflinching. She couldn't have been more than 12, but there was something in her stare, something fierce and sharp that made her look older, stronger. She shook her head. "We're not going back," she said, her voice cracking like ice on stone. Thaddeus's chest tightened. She wasn't afraid of the storm. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of trusting the wrong man. "You're not going back," he called, softer this time, forcing the steel out of his voice. "Just get in. You'll freeze out here." The smallest one, curls tangled, eyes too big for her thin face, swayed where she stood, then crumpled into the snow. A dark stain spread across her leg, blood against white. The redhead beside her tried to pull her up, but stumbled too, legs too weak, too cold. Thaddeus didn't think. He moved, boots crunching, heart pounding. He pushed through the storm and dropped to his knees beside the smallest girl. She was burning hot under the ice of her skin, lips trembling, eyes barely open. Without a word, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed nothing. A child shouldn't weigh nothing. The other hesitated. Their eyes darted between him and the cliff, between his SUV and the night. He didn't wait for their decision. He turned, marched back to the car, and pulled the door open with one arm. He set the girl inside, wrapped a blanket around her from the back seat, and turned to face them again. The blonde lingered in the snow, jaw tight, watching every move as if memorizing him for the day she might need to run. The redhead steadied herself, then followed, half carrying herself into the SUV. Finally, the blonde stepped forward. Each step was a gamble, each step a test, but she climbed in, pulling the door shut behind her. Inside, heat blasted from the vents. Thaddeus dug out emergency blankets, wrapped them around frail shoulders, and placed a thermos of cocoa into trembling hands. For a long moment, silence filled the car, a silence that wasn't safe yet. They huddled together, eyes flicking at him with suspicion, not relief. He watched them in the rearview mirror, 3 children, battered by the storm. But their fear wasn't of the cold. It was deeper, older. They weren't just lost. They weren't just hurt. They had escaped, and whoever they were running from was worse than the storm itself. The gates of the stone estate groaned open with a mechanical hum, cutting against the moan of the storm. Thaddeus drove slowly up the long winding path, his eyes catching the pale glow of lanterns marking the drive. Usually, he returned home, to quiet music playing in the car, to the buzz of emails and the calm certainty of victory. Tonight, his SUV felt less like a luxury and more like an ambulance, ferrying 3 lives he didn't yet understand but somehow already knew mattered more than every dollar he'd ever made. The girls said nothing during the ride. Their silence was different than the hush of fear. It was measured, guarded. The blonde one, Serafina, kept her body angled so she was between him and the other 2. Her thin arms wrapped protectively around them. Every so often, she would flick her gaze up at him in the rearview mirror, a hawk ready to strike even with nothing but bone and defiance to wield. Olia, the smallest, had slipped into a half-conscious daze, her head leaning against her sister's shoulder. Her curls were damp with melted snow, her lips pale except for the thin line of blood where she'd bitten through from shivering. Evangeline, the redhead, clutched her sister's sleeve like it was the only tether she had left. No one begged for warmth. No one cried. That, Thaddeus thought grimly, was what chilled him most of all. Children should have cried by now. As the SUV rolled to a stop beneath the massive portico of the house, the front door opened before he could even call. Margaret, his longtime housekeeper, stood there, her apron dusted in flour as if she'd been baking in the middle of the night. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun, but it was her eyes, sharp and Irish green, that narrowed the moment she saw the children. "Sweet mercy," she whispered, stepping forward into the freezing wind. "What on God's green earth?" "They need help," Thaddeus said quickly, his voice harsher than intended, almost breaking through the mask he wore in every boardroom. "Food, first aid, baths, keep them together." Margaret's eyes flicked from his face to the girls. She nodded without hesitation, but when she reached to take Evangeline's hand, the girl recoiled so violently she stumbled back into Serafina. The blonde stepped forward like a wolf cub shielding her pack. "Don't touch her," she snapped. Her voice wasn't trembling. It was steel wrapped in ice. Margaret froze, her hands lifted in a gesture of peace. "All right, then, all right. You come in how you like. No one's going to hurt you in this house." The words lingered in the night air, heavy, hesitant, but they carried something soft enough to settle the tension, if only a fraction. Serafina studied her, then gave the smallest nod. She led the way, stepping across the threshold first, pulling the other door with her, formation unbroken. Inside, the house was warm and sprawling, a fortress of stone walls, glass panels, and flickering fireplaces. Margaret guided them through the halls with the careful gentleness of someone handling broken glass. Pajamas were laid out in the guest suite, lights dimmed to a golden glow. The scent of chamomile drifting from a pot already, steeping on the stove. Every detail softened the edges of the storm, but not the edges of the girls. Thaddeus lingered in the study doorway, watching as Margaret worked. He couldn't recall the last time he'd stood silent in his own home, letting someone else carry the moment. Normally, every second was motion, every word was deal-making, every silence filled with calculation. Tonight, he was only a man standing in his fortress while 3 shadows turned his world into something unrecognizable. Later, after Margaret had ushered them toward warmth and cocoa, Thaddeus poured himself a drink in the library. The glass was heavy in his hand, but he didn't sip. He stared into the flames as if they could tell him what to do. His chest felt locked, frozen even against the fire's heat. Then came the sound. A knock, small, timid, against the library door. He turned, confused, and found her standing there, Olia, barefoot, draped in an oversized flannel gown with cartoon unicorns, her curls still damp. She said nothing, just held up a torn photograph with trembling fingers. He crossed the room and crouched before her. The picture was worn, edges curling, colors fading. A woman smiled back, tired but warm, her arms wrapped around 3 girls, Serafina, Evangeline, and Olia, younger, thinner, their faces too serious for children. "My mom," Olia whispered, her voice breaking the silence for the first time. "She died 3 months ago. They said we had to go into a home, but the home was bad." Her throat tightened, words spilling in sharp fragments. "They tried to separate us." Serafina fought. "We all did, but they said we were ungrateful, unfit. They gave us medicine. They tried to make us quiet." The words cut like blades, sharper than any hostile takeover Thaddeus had ever fought. He felt his chest burn, the same helpless ache that had haunted him when Isabella was in the hospital. When all his wealth and all his will hadn't been enough to change fate, did anyone help? he asked softly. Olia shook her head. No. One listens to kids who don't smile enough. That broke him in ways he didn't expect. He lowered himself further until his eyes were level with hers. I'm listening now, he said. He meant it with a finality that surprised even him. For a heartbeat, she leaned into his shoulder. The tiniest surrender before she jerked back, eyes wide with guilt. Sorry, she whispered. Don't be, he murmured, his voice rough. When she slipped back into the hall, clutching her photograph, Thaddeus remained crouched on the rug, staring at the empty space she left behind. The fire crackled behind him, but the warmth no longer mattered. Something colder, sharper, had begun. This wasn't just chance. This wasn't charity. This was war. And the enemy wasn't the storm. It was the people who had turned children into ghosts before their time. The storm eased by morning, but inside Thaddeus Stone's estate the weight of the night still lingered. Snow blanketed the grounds in silence, the mountains hidden in fog, but his mind was sharper than it had been in years. He hadn't slept. Not really. He had dozed in the leather chair of his library, his laptop open on his lap, the torn photograph of the girl's mother lying on the table beside him. Millfield Children's Home, the name stared back at him from the search bar. At first glance, it was everything the state wanted it to be. Bright websites with stock photos of laughing children, glossy mission statements about healing trauma and building futures. But Thaddeus had built an empire by knowing when something polished was hiding rot beneath it. He dug deeper, clawing through court filings, message boards, archived news clippings. Piece by piece, the mask slipped. He found complaints dismissed without explanation, whispers from former staff about discipline models, medical reports noting unexplained bruises, even a sealed case file with the name Harold Garrett, director of Millfield, lauded in press releases as a pioneer in child welfare reform. Garrett's quotes filled the page. Our residents are emotionally volatile, often defiant. Our duty is to break destructive attachments and rebuild healthier connections. Break attachments. Thaddeus read the words again, bile rising in his throat. That's what the girls had told him. They tried to split us up. They said we were ungrateful. He closed the laptop with a snap, his pulse pounding. He'd sat across from men like Garrett before. Men who preyed on weakness, who built fortunes from suffering, cloaked in respectability. In the corporate world, they were predators of money. But this was children. A faint shuffle in the hall pulled him from his thoughts. He turned and saw them, three small figures lingering near the doorway, framed by morning light. Serafina stood in front, arms crossed, her chin lifted like a sentry daring him to explain why he was awake before dawn. With fire still burning in his eyes, Evangeline hovered just behind, eyes darting toward the tray Margaret had left a plate of muffins, still warm. Olia peeked around them, the unicorn nightgown trailing at her feet, clutching her photograph like armor. Did you find anything? Serafina asked, her voice quiet but steady. Thaddeus hesitated. She was 12, but her tone wasn't a child's, it was a fighter's. He nodded slowly, enough to know you weren't lying. Her shoulders tightened, then loosened, a storm of relief she refused to show. They'll come for us, she said simply. The words hung in the air like frost. They won't take you back, he said firmly. Not while you're under this roof. Evangeline's lip trembled, but Serafina's gaze stayed hard. People say that. They don't mean it. I'm not people, he said. A silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint crackle of firewood. Then, from the corner of his eye, Thaddeus caught something movement, faint, fleeting, outside the window. He crossed the study quickly, peering through the glass for a moment. Only snow, only trees. Then, a glint, metal catching the light. He froze. A camera lens thought someone was out there, watching. His chest tightened. He turned back to the girls, forcing calm into his voice. Go to the kitchen. Margaret will make you breakfast. I'll be there soon. Serafina narrowed her eyes. Why? Because you need to eat, he said evenly. He couldn't tell them the truth, not yet. That the storm outside wasn't over, that the enemy wasn't the cold. It was the man behind that lens, waiting, recording. They left reluctantly, their formation unbroken. Serafina first, Evangeline clinging close, Olia trailing with her photograph, pressed to her chest. The moment they were gone, Thaddeus reached for his phone. There was one man he trusted for this kind of work, Jake Morrison, ex-cop, private investigator. The kind of man who understood shadows. Jake answered on the first ring, his voice gravel and suspicion. Stone, it's been years. I need eyes, Thaddeus said. Someone's watching this state, and I need everything you can find on Harold Garrett and Millfield Children's Home. Jake was silent for a long beat. You're poking a nest, Stone. Garrett's connected politicians, judges, donors. He's untouchable. You sure you want this fight? Thaddeus's eyes flicked back to the study door, where three girls had just disappeared into the hall. I'm sure, he said coldly, and I'm not asking for a fight. I'm asking for a war. Outside, in the tree line, the figure adjusted his lens, snapping another set of photos. Each frame painted a story that wasn't true. A billionaire, hiding three children in his mansion. No context, no history, only a lie waiting to ignite. And as the shutter clicked, the storm inside Thaddeus Stone grew darker, colder, sharper than the one that had nearly buried him on Devil's Pass. Because now he understood the truth. Saving them from the snow had been the easy part. Saving them from the system that hunted them, that would take everything he had left. The knock came at exactly 9 in the morning. Sharp, measured, official. Not the kind of knock you could ignore. Thaddeus Stone had been waiting for it since dawn. His chest coiled like a spring. The security feed had already shown the line of vehicles crawling up the drive. A gray sedan with tinted windows, the black and whites behind it. State Police, Child Protective Services. He stood in the foyer, the storm of last night still echoing in his bones. Behind him, Margaret held the girls upstairs in the guest suite. He'd seen Olia start trembling the moment the first car had appeared. Her little hands clamped around Serafina's arm like iron. Evangeline had whispered, "They found us." And Serafina had simply gone still, her jaw set like stone. Thaddeus opened the door before the second knock. The cold morning air swept in, carrying with it the scent of exhaust and authority. Three figures stood on the porch, the state officers in uniform, and between them, a woman in a gray suit with a clipboard pressed to her chest. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried no warmth, only procedure. "Mr. Stone?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Dana Ralston, Colorado Child Protective Services. We've received reports of 3 minors currently in your custody." Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. "We need to see them immediately." Thaddeus didn't flinch. His voice was cool, measured. The same tone he'd used in boardrooms when rivals thought they had the upper hand. "They're here, safe, but you don't have a warrant. You'll conduct your inquiry in the front parlor. Nowhere else." One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. The woman's smile tightened. "Mr. Stone, this is a matter of child welfare. Refusing cooperation could..." "Parlor," he said again, his voice dropping like a gavel. "Or you can come back with a court order." For a moment, the storm was only silence. Then, with a stiff nod, she stepped inside. The officers followed, boots echoing across marble. Thaddeus led them into the parlor, its tall windows spilling morning light across heavy leather chairs and a crackling fireplace. He gestured to the couch, then set a folder on the coffee table between them. "These," he said evenly, "are signed affidavits from the former Millfield staff members. Photographs of injuries, reports of psychological abuse, records of children locked in isolation rooms." He flipped the folder open, letting the evidence breathe in the open air. "Before you ask about my qualifications, look at theirs." "Dana." Ralston blinked. The officers leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the photographs of bruised arms, hollow faces, a room with no windows and a single cot. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice losing its bureaucratic calm. "I have resources," Thaddeus replied, "and I use them." He leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. "You think I took in 3 children on a whim? I have a trauma specialist on call, a physician who's already examined them, a private investigator digging through Millfield's records, and a legal team preparing to file federal charges. So, before you question me, ask yourself this: who benefits from getting those girls back under Millfield's control?" The fire snapped in the grate, the sound like a whip across the silence. Dana's lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced at the officers, both of whom looked suddenly less certain. The clipboard lowered slowly to her lap. "This is highly irregular," she managed. "No," Thaddeus said, rising to his feet, his presence filling the room like thunder. "What's irregular is that 3 children had to run into a blizzard to save themselves, while the system you represent turned a blind eye. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Dana straightened, gathering what composure she had left. "We'll need to verify these documents. If what you say is true, an investigation will be. It won't be enough." Thaddeus cut in, "And you know it. Garrett has friends, donors, politicians. You can either play his game or help me burn it down. Decide carefully." The conversation was over. He knew it. They knew it. He escorted them to the door, his jaw set, his eyes cold as the mountain air. When the cars finally rolled down the drive, silence fell heavy over the estate. Upstairs, 3 little girls waited with their ears pressed to the guest room door, hearts pounding, breaths held. They had heard the footsteps, the voices, the edge in Thaddeus's tone. They hadn't heard the words, but they knew something had happened. When the door finally creaked open, Thaddeus stood there. His face was carved in stone, but his eyes softened when they met Serafina's. He gave the smallest nod, a promise without words. Serafina's shoulders sagged just a fraction, and for the first time since he'd found them, she exhaled. But outside, just beyond the tree line, the camera clicked again. This time, the man behind it didn't just record. He spoke softly into a radio clip to his coat. "They've stalled. Stone's digging too deep. We moved to phase 2, and as the trees swallowed the figure again, Thaddeus Stone's estate felt less like a fortress and more like a target painted bright against the snow. The storm outside had broken, but inside Thaddeus Stone's estate, another one was gathering. Invisible and sharp-edged, he could feel it in the way the air seemed heavier, the way silence pressed down on the halls as if the house itself was holding its breath. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the stock market or merger contracts, or the delicate timing of quarterly announcements. His mind was consumed by something far simpler, far more dangerous. 3 little girls asleep upstairs, and the fact that someone out there wanted them back in chains. By noon, it began. His phone buzzed, screen lighting up with a message from Jake Morrison, the investigator he had called the night before. "They've started the smear. Watch the news feeds." Thaddeus clicked open the television in the study. The network banner screamed across the bottom of the screen. "Millionaire CEO under scrutiny. Hiding 3 children inside private estate." The footage rolled grainy photos taken through the trees, stretched by telephoto lens. Him carrying Olia into the SUV, the 3 girls huddled together in blankets, faces pale, eyes wide. No sound, no story, just images stripped of context. The anchor's voices dripped with insinuation. Why were the children there? Why had Stone not reported them immediately to authorities? Was this an act of charity or something more troubling? Thaddeus muted the television, his jaw tightening until his teeth ached. He'd seen reputations destroyed in a single cycle, fortunes erased with one narrative spun the wrong way. He knew exactly what Garrett was doing. A man like that didn't need truth, he needed doubt, enough to tilt the system in his favor. Margaret entered quietly, wiping flour from her hands. She glanced at the screen, then at him. Her voice was soft but sharp. "He's painting you the monster. I know. You going to let him?" Thaddeus turned to her, eyes like steel. "Do I look like a man who ever lets anyone write his ending for him?" Upstairs, the girls sensed it too. Serafina stood at the window, the curtains only slightly parted, scanning the grounds like a soldier at post. Evangeline sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching the stuffed bear Margaret had dug out of storage, but her eyes were far too old for toys. Olia traced the edge of the torn photograph, lips pressed tight. "They're coming again," Serafina said flatly. Evangeline swallowed hard. "Will he let them take us this time?" Serafina's throat worked, her eyes flicking toward the door. She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise, but the truth burned heavy on her tongue. Before she could speak, a knock startled them. The door creaked open, and Thaddeus filled the frame. He didn't look like a corporate titan anymore. No tailored suit, no polished tie, just a man in a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, lines carved deep around his eyes. His voice was steady, though it carried the weight of everything he didn't say. "They're trying to make me the villain," he said quietly. "They want to turn the world against us. But listen to me." His eyes locked on Serafina's. "I won't let them take you back. Not while I'm breathing." For the first time, her hard stare wavered, just for a heartbeat. That afternoon, Jake arrived in person, broad-shouldered, trench coat damp from melting snow, eyes sharp as a blade. He carried a thick folder and dropped it onto the study desk with a thud. "Garrett's pulling every string," Jake said. He's got friends in the governor's office, half a dozen judges on his holiday card list, and donors lining up to keep him clean. He's using your name to draw attention off his own back. Thaddeus flipped through the documents, sealed. Case reports, complaints buried in bureaucratic language. Even a whisper of foster families paid to stay silent. They buried this for years, Jake said. Kids going, complaints trickle out, but no one listens long enough. You've got money in reach, Stone, but Garrett's got the system. If you want to beat him, you'll have to fight on his terms. Public, loud. Thaddeus closed the folder, fingers tightening against the leather cover. Then we go public. Careful, Jake warned. They'll hit you harder. They'll drag your name through the mud until there's nothing left. Thaddeus leaned back, staring into the flames, looking at the fireplace. They already took everything from me once, he said softly. Isabella's name ghosted through his mind, the daughter he couldn't save. I won't let them do it again, not to these girls. That evening, the smear campaign deepened. Online articles sprouted like weeds, anonymous sources whispering about Stone's obsession with secrecy, reporters citing concerns of emotional instability. Hashtags bloomed across social media, demanding answers. The storm wasn't in the mountains anymore. It was on every screen, in every headline. Yet, in the upstairs guest suite, something shifted. The girls sat close, still huddled like always. But this time Evangeline whispered. He fought them. Serafina didn't argue. She just stared into the dark, remembering the fire in his voice downstairs. Then, a small voice broke the silence. Olia, clutching her photograph, whispered, "Can we stay? Forever?" The room still. Serafina's throat tightened, and for once, she had no answer. Downstairs, Thaddeus Stone looked out over his snowy estate, every instinct warning him that Garrett's next move wouldn't come on a television screen. It would come with boots, warrants, and chains. And when it did, he would be ready. Night fell heavy over the mountains, and with it came a silence that didn't feel natural. Thaddeus Stone stood on the veranda, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line where the storm had left shadows sharper than glass. The smear campaign had turned into wildfire in less than 24 hours. His face was on every screen, his name twisted in headlines that made him sound like a predator instead of a protector. But it wasn't the noise that worried him. It was the quiet, the way the air seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for the next strike. Inside, the estate was a cocoon of fragile warmth. Margaret had put the girls to bed after another careful dinner, though Serafina hadn't eaten much. She'd spent most of the meal staring at the windows, tense, alert, as though she expected men in suits to come crashing through the glass at any moment. Evangeline had clutched a piece of bread until it crumbled in her hands, too nervous to swallow. Olia had whispered again about staying forever, but this time her voice carried the tremor of hope instead of despair. Thaddeus turned away from the night and walked back inside, only to find Jake Morrison waiting in the study. The investigators' trench coat hung heavy with melted snow, his face grim as stone. He dropped a manila envelope onto the desk, the sound cracking the silence. "They're tightening the net," Jake said. "Garrett's people are moving faster than I expected. There's talk of a raid order, unofficial. Off the books. If CPS can't get the girls back legally, they'll try another route." Thaddeus slid the envelope open. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance shots from the woods. Men in heavy coats, not reporters, not police, operatives, watching, waiting. "How long?" Thaddeus asked quietly. "Days, maybe hours." Jake's voice was low. "You've rattled them. Those affidavits, the medical testimony, your refusal. The bandits made Garrett desperate. He's not just trying to discredit you now. He wants to bury you." Thaddeus closed the folder, a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. "Then let him come. I buried better men than Harold Garrett." Jake's mouth twitched in something almost like a smile. "This isn't a boardroom. These are men who don't care about clean exits. They'll come for you and the girls, and they'll make it look like you were the monster all along." For a long moment, the fire popped and crackled, filling the space between them. Then Thaddeus said that we take the fight where they can't silence it. Public, loud. If they want a monster, let's show the world the real one. The next morning, the retaliation began. It started with the pounding of fists on the gate, the flash of blue lights cutting across the snow. For squad cars lined the drive. Behind them, a van marked CPS. Margaret hustled the girls to the back hallway, whispering, "Stay together, no matter what." Serafina clutched her sister's hand so tight her knuckles were white. Thaddeus strode to the front door, calm and deliberate. He opened it before the officers could knock. At the center stood Dana Ralston again, the same CPS worker who had come days earlier. But this time her smile was gone. Her clipboard was gone too. She held a folded document instead, something heavier, more dangerous. "Mr. Stone," she said. Her voice clipped. "We have an emergency order for removal. The children must come." "With us? On whose authority?" "Signed by Judge Keaton," she replied. Her lips tightened. Effective immediately, Thaddeus's jaw clenched. Keaton. He knew the name. A judge with ties to Garrett's foundation, a man who owed his career to political donations. The corruption stank even through the cold morning air. "You're not taking them," he said. Voice low. An officer stepped forward. "Sir, obstructing. This order is a felony." "Felony?" Thaddeus cut him off, his eyes burning. "What about felony child abuse? What about locking children in cold rooms until they can't remember their own names? What about drugging them into silence?" The officer faltered. Dana's face tightened. "This isn't the place, Mr. Stone." "No," Thaddeus said, stepping closer, his voice like a blade. "This is exactly the place. You came to my door with lies and paperwork bought with blood. I've got evidence that will light your judge's career on fire. And if you think I'm handing those girls back to the man who tortured them, you'll have to drag me out of here in chains." For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to stop. Then a sound broke at the patter of small feet. Serafina, Evangeline, and Olia had slipped down the stairs, standing in the hallway behind him. Serafina's chin was lifted, her eyes blazing. She didn't hide this time. She didn't shrink. "You can't take us back," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "Well, tell everyone what you did. Everyone." Dana's composure cracked. She opened her mouth to respond, but Thaddeus's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. A message from Jake. "Press conference scheduled. 2 hours. Networks live. Bring the girls." Thaddeus pocketed the phone slowly, then looked back at Dana. His voice was calm now, almost cold. "You've lost your chance. From here on, it doesn't happen behind doors or in shadows. It happens under the lights." The CPS officers shifted. Uncomfortably, Dana's face flushed. Without another word, she folded the paper and signaled the retreat. The cars pulled away, their lights flashing against the snow. Until they disappeared around the bent dot inside the estate, Margaret exhaled, loudly, clutching her apron. Serafina still stood stiff, her body trembling with the effort of holding herself upright. Evangeline burst into quiet sobs, burying her face in her sister's shoulder. Olia pressed the photograph of their mother against her chest and whispered. "He didn't let them." Thaddeus turned from the door, his eyes sweeping over the three of them. For the first time in years, his voice broke as he said, "I won't. Not ever." But even as he held them close, he knew the next battle wouldn't be fought on his doorstep. It would be fought under the cameras, against the system, against Garrett himself. And when it came, it would be war in full daylight. The snow had stopped, but the storm hadn't. By the time Thaddeus Stone's SUV pulled into the downtown Denver press hall, the world outside his tinted windows was already boiling with tension. Satellite trucks lined the street. Reporters shoved microphones through the barricades, shouting his name, shouting questions. Their voices rising like a tide that threatened to drown the truth before it could surface. Inside the vehicle, the air was still. Serafina sat rigid in the back seat, her arms wrapped around Evangeline and Olia as if she could shield them from the frenzy outside. Evangeline's small fingers picked nervously at the hem of her sweater, her eyes darting toward every flash of light that pierced the glass. Olia clutched her torn photograph with both hands, whispering something so softly even her sisters couldn't hear. Thaddeus glanced at them in the mirror. His heart, once an iron machine for deals and money, now thudded like a war drum. He had faced hostile takeovers, Senate hearings, and rival CEOs with billions at stake. He had never felt the kind of weight pressing on him now. This wasn't about power. This was about lives, 3 small lives who had already endured more than most men could imagine. Jake Morrison leaned forward from the passenger seat, his voice low and steady. "Networks are live. Every channel, every feed. Once you walk in there, there's no going back." Thaddeus didn't blink. That's the point. They stepped into chaos. Camera shutters exploded like gunfire, voices pelting them with accusations. "Why are you hiding children, Mr. Stone? Who are they to you? Is this a cover-up? Margaret was already inside. Having prepared the stage with quiet efficiency, her apron traded for a navy coat, her hair pulled tight. She met them at the entrance, her eyes fierce with something, almost maternal, straight through. She whispered, "Don't stop for anyone." The press hall was packed, a sea of reporters and cameras. The hum of live broadcasts crackling in the air. At the podium stood a row of microphones, waiting like knives. Garrett's smear had already infected the air articles calling Thaddeus a recluse. Headlines painting him as unstable. The expectation was that he would stumble, that the billionaire Titan would crack under the scrutiny. Instead, he walked to the podium with 3 children at his side. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed, lenses focused. The girls stood huddled together, small against the towering man beside them. For a moment, Thaddeus said nothing. He simply looked out at the sea of lights and microphones and saw not predators, but an audience that had to be forced to see what had been hidden. "My name is Thaddeus Stone," he began, his voice carrying, with the weight of iron. "You know me as a businessman, a man of wealth, of mergers, of power. But what you don't know is that 2 nights ago, I found 3 little girls in the middle of a snowstorm. They weren't lost. They weren't wandering. They were running from a place you have all ignored." A murmur rolled through the crowd. He gestured softly toward the girls. Serafina lifted her chin, her jaw trembling but fierce. For a long heartbeat, she stared at the microphones, then stepped forward. Her voice cracked at first, then steadied with a sharpness that silenced the room. "They locked us in cold rooms," she said. "No heat, no blankets, sometimes for days. They said we were ungrateful because we wanted to stay together. They tried to separate us. They called us unstable, but we weren't. We were sisters. We were family." The microphones picked up every syllable. Evangeline clutched her hand, whispering, "Tell them," and Serafina went on. Her words spilled like fire across dry timber. She told them about the punishments, about the girl who was forced to wear soiled clothes for a week, about the pills they were given to keep them quiet. Every word was a blade, cutting through the lie Garrett had built for years. Olia, trembling, stepped forward then, her photograph clutched against her chest. She lifted it for the cameras to see. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but in the silence it carried. "This was my mom. She died. They told us we'd be safe at Millfield, but it wasn't safe. It was a prison." Flashes exploded. Reporters leaned forward, some with hands over their mouths. Then Jake stepped onto the stage, setting down a thick stack of documents. Affidavits, medical records, testimonies from former staff, evidence of funds funneled to Judge Keaton and other officials. Everything Garrett buried. "We've dug up, and now it's yours." The room erupted not with accusations, but with chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Their tones shifted from suspicion to outrage. Networks scrambled to stream the documents flashing across their feeds. Garrett's name, once praised, now dripped with venom in their voices. And then the shock. One of the reporters held up a breaking bulletin. "Millfield Children's home sealed records have just been opened by federal order. Harold Garrett has been indicted on charges of child endangerment, abuse, and fraud." The hall froze. The headline spread like fire. Garrett's empire wasn't just cracked, it was collapsing, live, in front of the entire nation. Thaddeus looked down at the 3 girls. Serafina's fierce eyes met his. Evangeline's tears spilled freely now, but they were tears of release. Olia held her photograph close, her lips whispering something only she and her mother could hear. For the first time since Isabella's death, Thaddeus felt something break open in his chest. Not grief, not rage, something softer, something like redemption. He turned back to the cameras, his voice low, steady, final. "The storm is over for them, but for every other child still inside a place like Millfield, it's only beginning. And I will not stop until every door like theirs is torn off its hinges." The microphones crackled, the cameras whirred, and in that moment, Thaddeus Stone, the billionaire who once believed power was measured only in numbers, became something else entirely. Not a CEO, not a rescuer, but a sword drawn in daylight, with 3 sisters at his side and an entire nation finally listening.